The sound of horses approaching through the mountain pass made Katrina Nolan's heart lurch with dread, because she knew exactly who was coming and what they wanted from her. She stood in the doorway of her small homestead outside Montezuma, Colorado, clutching the worn fabric of her apron as dust rose from the trail below. The year was 1882, and the autumn wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow down from the peaks. Behind her, 3 small faces pressed against her skirts, trying to see who was coming while staying hidden from view. Her husband had been dead for 8 months now, taken by a mining accident in one of the silver claims that dotted these mountains. Thomas Nolan had been a good man, but not a lucky one, and he had left her with debts that seemed to grow larger with each passing week. The children had grown thin over the summer despite her best efforts. 7-year-old Margaret had her father's dark hair and serious eyes. 5-year-old Samuel was all elbows and knees, his clothes already too short. And little Emma, barely 3, clung to her mother's leg with small fingers that Katrina could feel trembling through the fabric. The rider who crested the ridge was not the banker's representative she had been expecting. Instead, she saw a tall man on a strong bay horse, leading a pack mule behind him. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun, and even from a distance, she could see the confident way he sat his saddle. As he drew closer, she made out more details. A weathered face that looked to be in his late 20s, broad shoulders and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He reined in his horse about 20 feet from the house, giving her space, which she appreciated. Too many men lately had felt entitled to crowd her, to intimidate her with their proximity. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and steady. "Name's William Jamison. I'm looking for the Nolan place." Katrina felt her stomach tighten. "This is it. I'm Katrina Nolan." He dismounted in one smooth motion and stood there holding the reins, making no move to come closer. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I've been traveling from my ranch down near Durango. I had some business with the bank in town, and they mentioned your situation." "My situation," she repeated, her voice brittle. The children pressed closer behind her skirts, and she felt Margaret's hand grip the fabric tightly. William's eyes flicked down, and she saw something shift in his expression. He had noticed the children. For a long moment, he just stood there, and Katrina prepared herself for whatever was coming. She had heard all the speeches before. The concerned citizens who told her she should give up the homestead. The men who suggested arrangements that made her skin crawl. The women who clucked their tongues and said she should send the children east to an orphanage. "The banker, Harold Greaves, holds a note on your property," William said carefully. $300 due at the end of this month." "I know what I owe," Katrina said, lifting her chin. "And I know I don't have it, but I have until the 30th, and today is only the 16th. "Yes, madam." He shifted his weight and his horse nickered softly. "The thing is, Greaves sold me that note this morning." The world seemed to tilt beneath Katrina's feet. Greaves had sold her debt. To this stranger, her mind raced through the implications. At least with Greaves, she had known what to expect. This man was an unknown quantity, and unknown quantities were dangerous. "I see," she managed to say. "So you've come to collect or to tell me when I need to be gone." "Mama," Samuel whispered behind her, his voice frightened. William's jaw tightened and he looked away for a moment, out toward the peaks that surrounded the valley. When he looked back, there was something in his eyes that she could not quite read. "May I approach?" he asked. "I'd like to show you something." Every instinct told Katrina to refuse, to keep the distance between them, but what choice did she have? He owned her debt now. He could force the issue if he wanted. She gave a small, tight nod. He walked forward slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When he was about 6 feet away, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The debt note. She recognized the heavy cream paper that the bank used for such documents. William held it up so she could see her husband's signature at the bottom, and then, before she could even process what was happening, he tore it cleanly in half. Then in half again. And again, until the pieces were too small to read, and he let them flutter to the ground like snow. Katrina stared at the scattered pieces of paper, unable to comprehend what she had just witnessed. Behind her, Margaret gasped. "I don't understand," Katrina whispered. William met her eyes, and she saw something raw and honest in his face. "I saw them," he said simply. "Your children. 3 thin faces behind your skirts trying to be brave when they're clearly scared." He shook his head. "I have 1,000 acres down in the Animas Valley. I run cattle and I do well enough. I don't need your $300, Mrs. Nolan, and I don't need this land." "But you bought the note," she said, still trying to make sense of it. "I bought it because Greaves was bragging in the saloon about how he was going to take this property and sell it to a mining consortium. He was laughing about how he'd finally be rid of the widow who kept begging for extensions." William's voice hardened. I didn't much care for his tone. Katrina felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of fear that had been coiled there for months. Tears burned in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She could not afford to cry, not in front of this stranger, no matter what he had just done. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for people you don't even know?" He was quiet for a moment, and she saw old pain flicker across his face. "I grew up in a mining camp in California," he said. "My father died when I was 8. Cave in. My mother tried to hold things together, but the company took everything. We had nothing. If it hadn't been for a rancher who gave my mother work and let us stay in a line shack on his property, we would have starved or frozen that first winter." He looked at the children again, his expression softening. "I remember what it felt like to be hungry and scared. I remember watching my mother try to hide how worried she was. I swore that if I ever had the means, I'd help when I could." Margaret had edged forward slightly, peering around Katrina's skirt at this strange man who had just torn up their debt. Emma still clung to her mother's leg, but Samuel was watching William with something like wonder. "I don't know what to say," Katrina admitted. "Thank you seems insufficient." "It's enough," William said. He glanced up at the sky, where clouds were beginning to gather over the peaks. "Storm coming in, looks like. I should find a place in town for the night before it hits." "No," Katrina said, the word coming out before she had fully thought it through. He looked at her in surprise, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, it's a long ride back to town, and you're right about the storm. The least I can do is offer you supper and a place to sleep in the barn. It's warm enough, and there's fresh hay." She expected him to refuse, to make some excuse, but instead he nodded slowly. "That's kind of you, madam. I'd appreciate it. You can put your horse in the corral," she said, gesturing to the small enclosure beside the barn. "There's a pump by the trough. I'll have food ready in about an hour." William touched his hat again and led his horse away. Katrina watched him go, her mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. When she turned back to the house, she nearly stumbled over all 3 children who were staring up at her with wide eyes. "Is the bad man not coming anymore?" Emma asked in her small voice. Katrina crouched down and pulled all 3 of them into her arms, feeling their small bodies press against her. "No, sweetheart, the bad man is not coming anymore." "Is that man a good man?" Samuel asked, looking toward the barn where William was unsaddling his horse. Katrina thought about the debt notes scattered in pieces on the ground, about the way William had kept his distance until given permission to approach, about the old pain in his eyes when he spoke of his own childhood. "I think he might be," she said softly. Inside the house, Katrina moved through the familiar motions of preparing a meal, but her hands were shaking. She had been so certain that today would be the beginning of the end, that the debt would crush her, and she would lose everything. Instead, a stranger had ridden up her mountain and changed everything with a simple gesture. Margaret helped her peel potatoes while Samuel set the table. They had so little, but Katrina was determined to make a proper meal. She had been saving a small piece of salt pork for Sunday, but she brought it out now, along with the last of the carrots from the garden. There was cornbread from yesterday, and she could warm that. It was not much, but it was honest food, and it was all she had to offer. When William knocked on the door an hour later, his hat in his hands and his boots scraped clean, she invited him in. The house was small, just 2 rooms really, but it was tidy and warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of cooking filled the air. The children watched him warily as he entered, but there was curiosity mixed with the caution now. William moved carefully, as if aware that any sudden motion might frighten them. He took the seat Katrina offered at the rough-hewn table and waited until she and the children were seated before he touched his food. "This looks wonderful," he said. "Thank you." They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Katrina was acutely aware of how meager the portions were. William must have noticed too, because she saw him glance at the children's plates and then deliberately take smaller bites of his own food. "How long have you been ranching?" Katrina asked, trying to fill the awkward quiet. "About 5 years now," William said. "I worked as a trail hand for a long time, saved everything I could. When I had enough, I bought land in the valley and started with a small herd. It's grown since then. You run it yourself." "I have 2 hands who help during the busy seasons. Good men. But yes, mostly I manage it alone." He looked around the small house. "This is a fine place you have here. Good water, decent grazing in the valley below. Your husband chose well." "Thomas was a miner," Katrina said. "Not a rancher, but he wanted to give us a home, something permanent. He took the homestead claim 2 years ago, built this house with his own hands." Her throat tightened. "He was working the mines to earn money to buy stock, to start a small herd of our own. He had it all planned out." "I'm sorry for your loss," William said quietly. "Mining is hard, dangerous work." "You have to be hungry," Samuel blurted out suddenly, and everyone looked at him. He flushed but continued, "You're taking such small bites. Mama made extra." William smiled at the boy, and Katrina saw how it softened his entire face. "I'm perfectly satisfied, son. This is a fine meal." "You are not required to humor the children," Katrina said, but there was no heat in her words. "I'm not," William said, meeting her eyes. "I mean it." After supper, William insisted on helping clear the table despite Katrina's protests. He moved comfortably in the small space, careful not to crowd her. Margaret brought him a dish towel without being asked, and he thanked her gravely, as if she had offered him something precious. "You know any stories?" Samuel asked, hovering nearby. "Samuel," Katrina said sharply. "Mr. Jamison is tired from his journey. Don't pester him." But William shook his head. "I don't mind. And please call me William. Mr. Jamison makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and sitting in a bank." He settled into the chair by the fire, and the children drifted closer like moths to a flame. Even Emma, who had been so shy earlier, climbed onto the small stool near his feet. Katrina watched from the kitchen area, her hands still in the wash basin, as William told them about his journey from Durango, making it into an adventure with descriptions of the mountains and the animals he had seen. His voice was warm and engaging, and he had a knack for making even the simple things sound interesting. When he described a deer bounding across the trail, Samuel laughed with delight. When he mentioned an eagle soaring over a canyon, Margaret leaned forward with rapt attention. Katrina found herself listening just as intently as the children. It had been so long since there had been any lightness in this house, any moment that was not weighed down by worry and grief. Watching her children's faces glow in the firelight, seeing them smile, something loosened in her chest that had been clenched tight for months. When the story ended, and the children's eyes began to droop, Katrina shooed them toward the bedroom. They protested sleepily but obeyed, each of them murmuring quiet goodnights to William. Emma surprised everyone by walking over to him and very solemnly shaking his hand, as she had seen adults do. "Thank you for the story," she said in her piping voice. William took her small hand with great seriousness. "You are very welcome, Miss Emma." After the children were settled in bed, Katrina returned to the main room to find William banking the fire for the night. "You don't have to do that," she said. "Habit," he replied. "I've been taking care of my own fires for a long time." They stood there in the dimming light, and Katrina was suddenly very aware that they were alone. It was not improper exactly. He would be sleeping in the barn and she had children in the next room. But there was an intimacy to the moment that made her nervous. "I should let you get some rest," William said, as if sensing her thoughts. "Thank you again for the meal and the hospitality." "William," she said, and he paused at the door. "What you did today, tearing up that note. I still cannot quite believe it happened. You saved us. You saved my children from losing their home." He turned back to face her, his expression serious. "Mrs. Nolan, you've been saving your children every day since your husband passed. I just removed one obstacle. The strength has been yours all along." The words hit her with unexpected force. No one had said anything like that to her in months. Everyone had treated her like a victim, like someone to be pitied or managed, but William saw her differently. "Katrina," she said softly. "If I'm to call you William, you should call me Katrina." He smiled, and she felt an odd flutter in her chest. "Katrina, then. Good night. Good night." After he left, Katrina stood in the quiet house for a long time, listening to the wind pick up outside and the soft breathing of her children from the bedroom. She thought about the pieces of the debt note scattered in her yard, probably blown away by now. She thought about William's hands tearing the paper, and the look in his eyes when he had seen her children. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, for the first time in 8 months, she went to bed without the weight of that debt crushing down on her. It was enough to let her sleep more soundly than she had in longer than she could remember. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the threatened storm having passed to the east during the night. Katrina woke before sunrise, as she always did, and started the fire in the stove. She was mixing batter for Johnny cakes when she heard movement outside, and realized William must be up as well. She made extra breakfast, telling herself it was simply common courtesy. When she stepped outside to call him in, she found him by the corral, examining one of the fence posts that had been leaning precariously for weeks. "This needs replacing," he said by way of greeting. "The wood is rotted through at the base. Do you have any extra posts?" "There are a few behind the barn," Katrina said, "but you don't need to do that. You've done more than enough already." William straightened and looked at her. In the morning light, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. He was handsome, she realized with a start. She had been so overwhelmed yesterday that she had not really noticed. "I'm here, and the work needs doing," he said simply. "Unless you'd rather I didn't," Katrina thought about her pride, about how hard she had worked to maintain this place on her own. But she also thought about that fence post, and how she had been meaning to fix it for 3 weeks, but had not had the strength to dig out the old one and set a new one properly. "I'd be grateful," she admitted. Over breakfast, William was quiet but attentive. The children were less shy this morning, and Samuel chattered about wanting to see William's ranch someday. Margaret asked careful questions about what it was like to work with cattle. Even Emma climbed into the chair next to William's without hesitation. After the meal, William excused himself to work on the fence. Katrina tried to focus on her own chores, the washing and mending and endless tasks that filled her days, but she found her gaze drifting to the window. She could see him working, his movements efficient and practiced. He had stripped down to his shirt despite the cool morning, and she could see the play of muscles across his shoulders as he worked the post hole digger. "You are staring," Margaret said from behind her, and Katrina jumped. "I am not staring. I am merely keeping an eye on what needs to be done around here." Margaret gave her a look that was far too knowing for a 7-year-old. "He is nice." "Yes, he is," Katrina agreed, "and he likes us. I can tell. He is a kind man who did us a great favor." "That does not mean anything beyond that, Margaret. Do you understand?" But Margaret just smiled and went back to playing with Emma, and Katrina felt a strange mixture of hope and fear churning in her stomach. Hope was dangerous. Hope could lead to disappointment, and she had experienced enough of that to last a lifetime. Still, when she brought William a cup of water mid-morning and he smiled at her with gratitude, she felt that flutter in her chest again. "The post is set," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Should hold for a good long while now." "Thank you," Katrina said. "You have done so much already." William took a long drink of the water, then handed the cup back to her. His fingers brushed hers briefly, and she felt the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. "I was thinking," he said carefully. "Winter is coming on fast up here in the mountains. Do you have enough wood laid in?" Katrina's pride wanted her to lie, to say yes, everything was fine. But she thought about her children and how cold it would get in the coming months, and she forced herself to tell the truth. "Not as much as I would like," she admitted. "Cutting wood is slow going when I can only work while the children are napping or after they are asleep." William nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The dead timber is good and dry up in those groves," he said, gesturing to the stands of trees on the hillside. "If you don't mind, I could spend today cutting and hauling, get you a decent stockpile." "You were planning to leave today," Katrina said. "To get back to your ranch." "The ranch can wait another day or two. My hands know what needs doing, and there's no emergency pulling me back." He met her eyes. "I'd like to help if you'll let me." Katrina wanted to refuse. Wanted to maintain her independence, to prove she could handle everything on her own. But the truth was, she could not handle everything on her own. She had been trying for months and she was failing. The children were thin. The woodpile was low. The fence was falling apart. Accepting help was not weakness. It was practical necessity. "All right," she said. "Thank you." William spent the day in the timber, and the sound of his axe rang through the clear mountain air like a bell. The children played in the yard, their voices lighter than Katrina had heard in ages. She worked on mending a tear in Samuel's only other shirt, and tried not to think about what it meant that this man was here, helping them, asking for nothing in return. By evening, there was an impressive stack of split wood by the side of the house, and William looked exhausted but satisfied. Over supper, which was another simple meal of beans and cornbread, Samuel announced that he wanted to be a rancher when he grew up. "It's hard work," William said, "but honest work. If you're willing to put in the effort, the land will provide." "Can you teach me?" Samuel asked eagerly. "Samuel," Katrina said warningly, but William smiled. "If your mother doesn't mind, I can show you a few things before I leave. Basic things, like reading animal tracks and checking water sources." Samuel looked at his mother with such hope that Katrina could not bring herself to refuse. "If it is not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." That night, after the children were asleep, Katrina stepped outside for a breath of air. The stars were brilliant in the mountain darkness, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. She was surprised to find William sitting on the porch step, looking up at the sky. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said. "You're not. This is your home." He shifted slightly, making room on the step. "Though you're welcome to join me if you'd like." Katrina hesitated, then sat down, leaving a proper distance between them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the mountains. "Can I ask you something?" Katrina finally said. "Of course." "Yesterday, when you saw the children, you said that was why you tore up the note. But you had already bought it from the bank before you came here, before you saw them. Why did you really buy the note?" William was quiet for a long moment. "The truth is, I'm not entirely sure." Greaves was being cruel, boasting about turning out a widow and her children. It made me angry. I had the money, so I bought the note to keep him from doing it. I suppose I thought I'd come up here, meet you, and work out some kind of reasonable payment plan, something you could actually afford. "And then you saw us," Katrina said softly. "And then I saw them," William agreed. "Those three little faces trying to be brave. And I saw you, standing there trying to protect them even though you were clearly terrified. And I just thought, what kind of man would I be if I held this debt over your head? What would it accomplish except to make hard lives harder? You are a good man, William Jamison." He turned to look at her, and in the starlight his eyes were dark and intense. "I'm trying to be. My father was a good man, and he died with nothing to show for his years of hard work except a widow and a son who went hungry. I swore I'd be different, that I'd build something lasting, something that mattered. But what's the point of success if you don't use it to help others when you can?" Katrina felt something shift inside her, some ice around her heart beginning to thaw. She had been so focused on survival, on just getting through each day, that she had forgotten there were still good people in the world. People who helped without expecting anything in return. "Your father would be proud of you," she said. William smiled. "I hope so. My mother certainly is. She lives in a nice house in Denver now, which I bought for her. She spends her days gardening and hosting her church ladies' circle. It's a far cry from that mining camp. She must miss you. I visit when I can, and she understands that the ranch needs me." He paused. "Though she's been making noises lately about wanting grandchildren. Apparently, I'm 29 and running out of time." Katrina laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had laughed? "Mothers are like that. Mine was already planning my wedding when I was 16. Do your parents live nearby?" The laughter faded. "No. They died of fever when I was 19. It was just after Thomas and I married. We had been planning to move back east to be near them, but then we got word and by the time we arrived, they were already gone." "I'm sorry," William said. "That must have been terrible." "It was. But Thomas was wonderful through it all. He held me when I cried and helped me settle their affairs. We decided to head west after that to start fresh somewhere new. That's how we ended up in Colorado." She looked out at the dark shapes of the mountains. "I loved him very much, I can tell, and he clearly loved you to build this place for you and the children." They sat together in the darkness, and Katrina felt a strange sense of peace. Here, in this moment, the crushing weight of grief and responsibility had eased slightly. She was just a woman sitting under the stars with a man who had shown her kindness. It was simple, and it was enough. The next morning, William made good on his promise to teach Samuel some basic ranching skills. Katrina watched from the porch as he showed the boy how to read different animal tracks in the dirt, explaining what they meant about the creature's size, speed, and direction. Samuel hung on every word, his face bright with interest. Margaret joined them after a while, and William included her without hesitation. treating her observations with the same seriousness he gave Samuel's questions. Even Emma toddled over and William crouched down to show her a particularly clear deer track, letting her touch it with her small fingers. Watching them together, Katrina felt a longing so sharp it almost hurt. This was what she wanted for her children. Not just survival, but a life. Laughter and learning and moments of simple joy. They deserved better than the grinding poverty and constant fear that had become their daily reality. "You're thinking hard thoughts," William said, and she realized he had come up to the porch while the children played nearby. "Just watching them," Katrina said. "They're so happy today, I had forgotten they could be like this. Children are resilient. Given half a chance, they bounce back. I want to give them more than half a chance. I want to give them everything." She looked at him. "But I don't know how. The mining is still here, and I could try to find work in town, but who would watch the children? And even if I found something, would it be enough?" William leaned against the porch rail, his expression thoughtful. "Can I make a suggestion without you taking it the wrong way?" "I suppose that depends on the suggestion. You have good land here. The valley below has decent grazing and you have water rights to the creek. With a small herd, maybe 20 head to start, you could make a living. Not rich, but enough to feed your family and keep the homestead going." "I don't have money for cattle," Katrina pointed out. "No, but I do." He held up a hand before she could protest. "Hear me out. I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a business arrangement. I provide the initial stock and some training on how to manage them. In return, when you sell your first calves, you pay me back half the cost. The other half is my investment in a fellow rancher getting started." Katrina stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because it makes sense. This land should be used properly. You need a livelihood. I have resources I can share without hurting my own operation." He met her eyes. "And because I believe in you. I've seen how hard you work, how you've kept this place going on your own. With the right tools, you could build something real here. I don't know anything about ranching." "You can learn. You're clearly intelligent and capable, and I could come up periodically to check on things, offer advice." He smiled slightly. "Call it consulting work." Katrina wanted to say yes immediately, but caution held her back. "And what do you get out of this, really?" "It seems like all the benefit is on my side." William was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, the satisfaction of helping someone who deserves it, and maybe, if I'm being selfish, a friend up here in the mountains. Someone I can visit occasionally without feeling like I'm imposing. A friend." The word seemed inadequate for what she was feeling, but it was safe. Acceptable. She could agree to friendship without risking too much. "All right," she said. "But we do it properly with a written agreement. I want to pay you back fully, not just half." "Stubborn," William said, but he was smiling. "Practical," Katrina corrected. They spent the rest of the morning working out the details. William had paper in his saddlebag and they wrote out a simple contract. 20 head of cattle, to be delivered in the spring after the worst of the winter had passed. In return, Katrina would pay him back over 3 years from the sale of calves and any other increase in the herd. William wanted to charge no interest, but Katrina insisted on a fair rate. They compromised on something small. When the agreement was written and signed, Katrina felt both terrified and exhilarated. She had just committed to becoming a rancher, something she knew almost nothing about. But she had also secured a future for her children, a way forward that did not involve begging or charity or losing everything they had left of their father's dreams. "I should head back tomorrow," William said that evening. "I've been gone longer than I planned, and there's work waiting." Katrina felt a surprising pang of disappointment. In just 2 days, she had grown accustomed to his presence. The house felt fuller with him there, and the children had blossomed under his attention. Samuel had talked of nothing but cattle and ranching all afternoon. Margaret had asked careful questions about what it was like to live in the Animas Valley. Even Emma had started calling him Mr. Will and demanding that he lift her up to see the birds in the trees. "Of course," Katrina said. "You've already given us so much of your time." "I'll come back in the spring," William said, "to deliver the cattle and show you how to manage them, and before that if I can get away. It's important to check on my investment." He said it lightly, but Katrina heard the promise underneath. He would come back. He was not just riding away and forgetting about them. That night, the children were reluctant to say goodbye. Samuel shook William's hand with great solemnity and thanked him for the lessons. Margaret gave him a small smile and told him to travel safely. Emma wrapped her arms around his leg and had to be gently detached, her eyes filling with tears. "I'll see you again," William promised, crouching down to her level. "I'll bring the cows in the spring, remember, and maybe by then you'll be big enough to help your mother take care of them." Emma sniffed and nodded, then scurried back to hide behind Katrina's skirts. After the children were in bed, Katrina walked William out to the barn, where he had already saddled his horse for an early morning departure. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I don't think you realize what you've done for us." "I think I do," William said softly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and took her hand. His grip was warm and strong. "You're going to do well, Katrina, I know it. I hope so. I cannot afford to fail." "You won't." "You're too stubborn," he smiled. "And if you need anything, send word to the ranch. I'll come. That's a long ride just to check on some cattle." Maybe it's not just about the cattle. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Katrina's heart was beating too fast, and she was intensely aware of his hand still holding hers. "William," she said, but she did not know what else to say. She was a widow with 3 children. He was a successful rancher who could have his pick of women without all the complications she brought. This could not be what it seemed like. "I know," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "It's too soon. You're still grieving, but I wanted you to know that when I come back, it won't just be about the business arrangement. I'd like to know you better, Katrina, and your children, if you're willing." "I don't know what I'm willing for," Katrina said honestly. "Everything is still so confusing." "That's all right, we have time." He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Good night, Katrina, good night." Katrina stood in the doorway of the barn long after he had walked back to the house, her hand still tingling from his touch. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something enormous and terrifying and wonderful, and she did not know whether to step forward or pull back. Finally, she went inside to her own cold bed and lay awake for hours, thinking about calloused hands and kind eyes and the way her children had smiled today. The next morning, William was gone before sunrise. He left a note on the porch weighed down with a smooth river stone. It said simply, "Until spring. Take care of yourself, William." Katrina tucked the note into her apron pocket and went about her day, which felt strangely empty now. The children's moped and even the newly repaired fence and the large stack of firewood seemed inadequate compensation for his absence. But life went on as it always did. The days grew shorter and colder. Snow came to the high peaks and then down into the valleys. Katrina worked steadily through the fall, preparing for winter. She was grateful every day for the firewood William had cut, and for the fact that she no longer had the debt hanging over her head. She thought about him more than she probably should. Late at night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, she would take out the contract they had signed and read it over. His handwriting was neat and precise, surprisingly educated for a rancher. She wondered about his life, about the ranch he had built from nothing, about what he did in the evenings when his work was done. She wondered if he thought about her too. Winter settled in hard and deep. Montezuma was buried under snow, The passes closed, and Katrina's world shrank to the house and barn and the short distance between them. The children grew restless being cooped up inside, but there was nothing to be done about it. They passed the long dark evenings with stories and simple games, and Katrina taught Margaret her letters while Samuel practiced his numbers. Christmas came and went quietly. Katrina had very little to give, but she made each child a small gift from what she had. A rag doll for Emma, sewn from scraps. A wooden horse for Samuel, carved painstakingly over many nights. A hair ribbon for Margaret, dyed blue from berries she had preserved in the fall. The children were delighted, which made her heart ache. They deserved so much more than this hardscrabble existence. In January, a particularly brutal storm rolled in and lasted for 3 days. The wind howled around the house, and snow piled in drifts taller than Katrina. They burned through wood at an alarming rate just to keep warm, and Katrina was grateful once again for William's foresight. On the second night of the storm, with the children huddled under every blanket they owned and the fire roaring, Samuel said, "Do you think Mr. Will is all right?" "I'm sure he is," Katrina said, though she had been wondering the same thing. "He has a house and men to help him. He knows how to handle winter storms." "When will he come back?" Emma asked. "In the spring, remember, when the snow melts and the passes open." "That's forever away," Samuel grumbled. Margaret, who rarely spoke up, said quietly, "Mama likes him." All eyes turned to Katrina. She felt her face heat. "Mr. Jamison is a kind man who has helped us greatly. Of course I like him." "Not like that," Margaret said with the exasperation of a child who knows she is right. "You like him like you liked Papa." "Margaret, that is enough," Katrina said sharply. But later, after the children were asleep, Katrina lay awake and thought about her daughter's words. Did she like William that way? It felt disloyal to Thomas to even consider it, but Thomas had been dead for over a year now. At what point did she owe it to herself and her children to consider a future that included someone else? And did William truly feel that way about her, or had she misread his kindness? He had said he wanted to know her better, but that could mean many things. She was probably being foolish, building castles in the air when she should be focused on practical matters like survival. Still, as the storm howled outside and the fire burned low, she found herself imagining what it would be like to have someone to share these long winter nights with. Not just any someone, but a man with steady hands and kind eyes who made her children laugh. February brought slightly warmer temperatures and occasional breaks in the snow. Katrina was able to get into town once, struggling through drifts that nearly swallowed her horse. She bought basic supplies with the last of her carefully hoarded money and listened to the gossip in the general store. Harold Greaves, the banker, had apparently been furious when he learned that William had torn up the note on the Nolan property. He had ranted in the saloon about do-gooders and interfering strangers, but there was nothing he could do about it. The debt was paid off, the note destroyed. Katrina's land was truly hers now. "That Jamison fellow must think a lot of you," the storekeeper's wife said with a knowing look. "Men don't usually go throwing money around for nothing." Katrina kept her face neutral. "He is a charitable man. He was helping someone in need, nothing more." But the woman's words followed her home and added to the confusion of feelings she was already struggling with. March arrived with mud and melting snow and the first hints of spring. The children were ecstatic to be able to play outside again, and Katrina began the work of preparing the land for planting a kitchen garden. She had seeds saved from last year, and she planned to put in a larger garden this time. With cattle coming, she would need more food to sustain her through the extra work. She tried not to count the days until spring was truly established, until the passes would be clear enough for travel. She tried not to watch the trail every time she heard a sound that might be hoofbeats. She failed at both. In early April, a rider did come up the trail. But it was not William. It was a young man, barely 20, who introduced himself as Jack Peterson, one of William's ranch hands. Katrina's heart sank even as she greeted him politely. If William had sent his hand, did that mean he was not coming himself? "Mr. Jamison asked me to bring you this," Jack said, handing her a sealed letter. "And to check if there's anything you need. He said he'd have come himself, but there's been some trouble with rustlers down in the valley. He's dealing with that." Katrina took the letter with hands that were not quite steady. "Is he all right?" "Oh yes, madam, he's fine, just busy. Rustlers shot a couple of our cattle and ran off with 3 more before we caught wind of it. Mr. Jamison's been working with the marshal to track them down." "I see. Well, thank you for bringing the letter. We're managing well here." Jack looked around the homestead with an appraising eye. "Place looks good. Mr. Jamison said you were a hard worker. He was right." After Jack left, promising to tell William that everything was fine, Katrina took the letter inside and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The children clustered around her, curious. The letter was written in that same neat handwriting she remembered from the contract. "Dear Katrina, I apologize for not writing sooner. The winter was harder than usual and spring has brought its own challenges. I hope you and the children came through the cold months well. I had planned to come myself as soon as the passes cleared, but we have had trouble with rustlers. Several ranches in the valley have lost stock, and we are working together to put a stop to it. I cannot leave until this matter is resolved, but I wanted you to know I have not forgotten my promise. Jack will check on you periodically and can bring word if you need anything. I have instructed him to help with any heavy work you might need done. The cattle I promised will come as soon as I can safely transport them. I estimate mid to late May, depending on how quickly we resolve the current situation. I hope you are well. I think of you often. Yours, William." Katrina read the letter 3 times, her eyes lingering on that last line. "I think of you often." It was not a declaration, but it was something. A small acknowledgement of what might be growing between them. "Is Mr. Will coming?" Samuel asked. "Not yet," Katrina said. "He has problems at his ranch he needs to solve first, but he will come when he can." The children were disappointed, but accepted this news with the resilience William had predicted. They went back to their play, while Katrina folded the letter carefully and placed it in the tin box where she kept her few precious things. True to William's word, Jack Peterson came by twice more over the next few weeks. He repaired the barn door that had been hanging crooked and helped Katrina plant fence posts for a larger corral. He was a cheerful young man, full of stories about life on the ranch, and he clearly thought the world of William. "Best boss I ever had," Jack said one day while they were working. "Fair and honest, and he treats his hands like people, not just labor. When my sister got sick last year, he gave me time off and paid me anyway. Not many ranchers would do that." "He's a good man," Katrina agreed. "He talks about you, you know. Well, not talks exactly. But he mentions checking on the widow and her children more often than is probably necessary if it was just business." Jack grinned. "I think he's sweet on you, madam." Katrina felt her face heat. "I think you're being presumptuous." "Maybe," Jack said, unabashed. "But I've worked for Mr. Jamison for 3 years now, and I've never known him to go out of his way for anyone the way he has for you. Just saying." After Jack left, Katrina allowed herself to hope just a little. If even William's ranch hands could see that he cared, maybe she was not imagining things. Maybe there really was something developing between them, something worth exploring when he finally came back. May brought warm sun and new green growth across the mountains. Katrina's garden was thriving, and the children were brown from playing outside. Margaret had shot up taller, and Samuel had lost a tooth. Emma was talking in full sentences now, her vocabulary expanding daily. On a warm morning in late May, Katrina was hanging laundry on the line when she heard the unmistakable sound of cattle. She turned and saw a dust cloud rising from the valley below, and her heart began to race. William was coming. Finally. She called the children, and they all stood by the porch, watching as the small herd made its way up the trail. William rode in front on his bay horse, with Jack and another hand flanking the cattle to keep them moving in the right direction. When they got closer, Katrina could see William's face and her breath caught. He looked tired, thinner than she remembered, with a healing cut above one eyebrow. But when he saw her standing there with the children, his entire face lit up with a smile. "Hello," he called, reining in his horse. "Sorry it took so long." "You're here now," Katrina said, and she could not keep the joy out of her voice. "That's what matters." The next few hours were busy with getting the cattle settled in the makeshift corral Jack had helped build. There were 20 head, as promised, all healthy-looking despite the long drive. William moved among them with confident ease, pointing out which were the best breeding stock and which would produce the best calves. The children were fascinated, especially when William let them help with the work. He showed Samuel how to approach a cow without startling it, and let Margaret help check the water trough. Even Emma got to pet one of the gentler heifers under close supervision. When the cattle were settled and William's hands had been fed and sent to make camp a respectful distance from the house, Katrina finally had a moment alone with William. They stood by the corral fence, watching the cattle adjust to their new home. "You look tired," Katrina said. "It's been a challenging few months," William admitted. "The rustlers were more organized than we thought. It took weeks to track them down and bring them to justice." "Is that how you got that?" Katrina asked, gesturing to the cut on his forehead. He touched it self-consciously. "One of them put up a fight. It looks worse than it is." "Did they hurt anyone else?" "A couple of ranchers were roughed up, and we lost more cattle than I'd like to count. But we got most of the stolen stock back, and the men responsible are in jail now. The valley should be safer for a while." "I'm glad you weren't seriously injured." William turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse quicken. "I thought about you the whole time. Even when things were dangerous, I'd find myself wondering how you were managing, what the children were doing, whether the winter had been hard." "We managed," Katrina said softly. "Thanks to you. The firewood you cut lasted all winter. And the debt being gone meant I could use what little money I had for food instead of trying to make payments. I'm glad." He hesitated, then said, "Katrina, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart jumped with anxiety. "What is it?" "When I rode up here last fall, it was supposed to be a simple business transaction. Buy the note, work out a payment plan, maybe check on you once or twice a year. That was all." He ran a hand through his hair. "But then I met you and the children, and everything changed. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I left. When Jack came back with news about how well you were doing, I was happy, but I was also jealous that he got to see you and I didn't." Katrina's mouth went dry. "William, I know it's complicated. You're a widow, still grieving. You have children to think about, and I'm not an easy man to be with. The ranch demands long hours and hard work, and I don't have much to offer except land and cattle and a life that can be lonely sometimes." He took a deep breath. "But I care about you. More than I probably should, considering we barely know each other. And I wanted you to know that before we go any further with this business arrangement, because it's not just business for me anymore." Katrina felt like all the air had left her lungs. He was saying everything she had hoped for and feared in equal measure. Part of her wanted to throw caution aside and admit that she felt the same way. But another part, the practical widow who had survived the last year through sheer stubborn determination, was terrified. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I feel like I'm betraying Thomas by even having this conversation." "You're not," William said gently. "Loving someone new doesn't mean you stop loving the person you lost. Your heart is big enough for both." "Is it?" "Because sometimes I feel like it's barely big enough to hold all the grief and worry I carry every day." William reached out and took her hand, just as he had that night last fall. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. We can take this as slowly as you need. I can come visit when I can get away, help you learn to manage the cattle, and we can see where things go. No pressure, no expectations. And if I decide I can't do this, that it's too much, too soon, then I'll respect that. We'll keep things strictly business and I'll be your friend and nothing more. But I had to tell you the truth. I couldn't keep pretending this was just about the cattle." Katrina looked down at their joined hands, his large and work-worn, hers small and scarred from her own labors. It would be so easy to pull away to protect herself from the possibility of more loss and pain. But it would also mean missing out on the possibility of something good, something that made her heart race and her children smile. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "I know. I am too. But I think about you too, more than I should, more than I feel like I have the right to." William's grip on her hand tightened. "You have every right, Katrina. You're alive and you deserve to be happy. Your children deserve to see their mother smile. I don't know if I remember how. You smiled when you saw me today, I saw it, had she?" Katrina thought back and realized he was right. She had smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Give me time," she said. "Let me think about this. You're right that we barely know each other. Maybe over the summer, with you visiting, we can figure out if what we're feeling is real or just loneliness." "That's fair," William said. "And Katrina, whatever you decide, I'm here. The cattle are yours, the debt is forgiven, and none of that changes based on what happens between us. I want you to know that." It was exactly the right thing to say. Katrina felt some of her fear ease, knowing that she was not risking her children's security by exploring these feelings. "Thank you," she said, "for understanding, for being patient, always." They stood together by the corral as the sun sank lower, painting the mountains gold and pink. The cattle lowed softly, and from the house came the sound of the children playing. It was a peaceful moment, full of possibility, and Katrina let herself enjoy it without worrying about what came next. Over the next 3 days, William taught Katrina everything he could about managing cattle: how to check them for illness or injury, how to move them to new grazing without stressing them, how to identify which calves would make good breeding stock, how to manage water and salt, and all the other details that went into successful ranching. Katrina absorbed it all like a sponge, asking questions and taking notes in a small ledger. William was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid for not knowing something. The children helped too, learning alongside their mother, and William praised their efforts generously. On the last evening before William had to leave, Katrina made a special supper with a chicken she had been saving. It was a feast compared to their usual meals, with biscuits and gravy and even a pie made from dried apples. After the children were in bed, William and Katrina sat on the porch again, as they had that first night. "I wish I could stay longer," William said. "But the ranch needs me, and I've already been away too long. I understand. You've done so much already. I'll come back in a month if I can, sooner if you need me. And Jack will check on you weekly like before. We'll be fine. I feel much more confident now that you've shown me what to do." William turned to face her. "Katrina, I meant what I said, about wanting to know you better, about caring for you. That hasn't changed. I know, and I've been thinking about it." Katrina took a deep breath. "I'm not ready for anything serious yet, but I'd like to keep getting to know you. I'd like for you to visit when you can, and maybe over time we can see if this is something real." William smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "That's all I'm asking for, a chance." "Then you have it." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "May I write to you? Between visits? I'd like that. Though I have to warn you, my letters might be mostly about cattle troubles and what the children are up to." "That sounds perfect." They sat together until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. William told her about his mother in Denver and the ranch he was building. Katrina told him about her parents and growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting Thomas and the early days of their marriage. It was easy, comfortable, and when William finally said goodnight, Katrina realized she was smiling again. The next morning, William and his hands prepared to leave. Samuel was distraught, and Margaret looked close to tears. Even Emma's lower lip was trembling. "I'll be back soon," William promised, crouching down to their level. "And in the meantime, you have important work to do. Those cattle need taking care of, and your mother is going to need your help." "Can we write you letters too?" Margaret asked. "I would love that." "Have your mother send them with her letters, and I'll write back." After final goodbyes and promises to return soon, William mounted his horse. Before he rode away, he looked at Katrina and tipped his hat. "Until next time," he said. "Until next time," she echoed. She watched him ride down the trail until he was out of sight, and only then did she realize she was still smiling. The children clustered around her, and Samuel said, "He really likes you, Mama." "I think he does," Katrina admitted. "You like him back." "I think I do." "Good," Emma announced. "He's nice, and he's going to be our new papa." "Emma, it's not that simple," Katrina started to say, but Margaret interrupted. "But maybe it could be, eventually." Katrina looked at her 3 children, at their hopeful faces and their 2 thin frames that were finally starting to fill out. She thought about William's kindness, his patience, the way he had torn up the debt note without hesitation. She thought about how he made her heart race and how she smiled when he was around. "Maybe," she said. "Eventually, but we have time. There's no rush." And there wasn't. The summer unfolded in a pattern of work and learning and slow growth. The cattle thrived under Katrina's careful management. The garden produced more than she had hoped. The children grew strong and healthy, their laughter filling the homestead. William came back 3 times over the summer, each visit lasting several days. He helped with heavy work, taught Katrina more about ranching, and spent time with the children. But he also made time for quiet conversations on the porch, for walks along the creek, for moments that were just the 2 of them. They talked about everything. Their fears and hopes, their pasts and possible futures. William told her about the loneliness of the ranch, how he sometimes went days without talking to anyone but his hands. Katrina told him about the grinding fear of the first year after Thomas died, how she had sometimes wondered if it would have been easier to just give up. "But you didn't," William said. "You kept going, kept fighting for your children. That takes incredible strength, or incredible stubbornness." "I'll take stubborn over weak any day." With each visit, they grew closer. William was careful never to push, never to presume. He asked before taking her hand, before sitting too close, before any gesture that might be seen as intimate. Katrina appreciated his restraint, even as part of her wished he would throw caution aside and just kiss her. The letters between visits were a lifeline. William wrote about the ranch and his mother's latest letter and a new horse he had bought. Katrina wrote about the cattle and the children's antics and how the homestead was slowly becoming profitable. The children added their own notes, and William always responded to them individually. By August, Katrina realized she was in love with him. It was different from what she had felt for Thomas, which had been the passionate love of youth. This was deeper, steadier, built on mutual respect and shared values and the knowledge that they had both survived hard times. When William came for his August visit, she told him. They were walking by the creek, the children playing in the distance where they could see them but have a moment of privacy. The water burbled over stones, and aspen leaves rustled overhead. "William, I need to tell you something," Katrina said. He looked at her with concern. "Is everything all right, more than all right? I just wanted you to know that I've made my decision about us." His whole body tensed. "And I love you. I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere between you tearing up that debt note and now, I fell in love with you. And I think if you still want to, we should think about a future together." For a moment, William just stared at her. Then he let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob, and he pulled her into his arms. "I have loved you since that first day," he said into her hair. "When I saw you standing there trying to protect your children even though you were terrified. I told myself it was too fast, that I needed to be sensible, but I knew even then." Katrina pulled back enough to look up at him. "Really, really?" He cupped her face in his hands. "Katrina Nolan, may I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. His lips were gentle on hers, tentative at first, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Katrina leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palms as fast as her own. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "So what happens now?" Katrina asked. "Now, I think we should talk about getting married, if you'll have me. Are you proposing?" "Not officially. Not yet. I want to do it properly with a ring and a romantic speech," he grinned. "But yes, that's where I hope this is heading. The children will be thrilled. And you, are you thrilled?" Katrina thought about it, really considered how she felt. There was still grief for Thomas, and probably always would be. But there was also joy and hope and excitement for the future. She could honor Thomas's memory while also building a new life with William. Her heart was indeed big enough for both. "Yes," she said. "I'm thrilled." They told the children that evening, and the reaction was everything Katrina could have hoped for. Samuel whooped and jumped around the house. Margaret smiled so wide Katrina thought her face might split. Emma declared that she had known all along and demanded to know when she could call William Papa. "Soon," William promised, swinging her up in his arms. "Very soon." That night, after the children were finally asleep and William had retreated to the barn, Katrina sat by the fire and thought about the past year. She thought about the desperate widow who had stood in this doorway, terrified of losing everything. She thought about the man who had seen her children and chosen kindness over profit. She thought about how much had changed, and how much more was about to change. She was ready. William left 2 days later with a promise to return in September with a ring and a proper proposal. In the meantime, Katrina and the children prepared. They cleaned the house from top to bottom, planted late-season flowers by the porch, and generally made the homestead as presentable as possible. Jack delivered letters weekly, and Katrina learned that William had gone to Denver to visit his mother and tell her the news. The response had apparently been enthusiastic, with promises to come for the wedding whenever it happened. In mid-September, William returned. He rode up the trail at sunset, and Katrina's heart leaped when she saw him. He dismounted and walked toward her with purpose, and she met him halfway. "I missed you," he said. "I missed you too." He took her hand and led her to the porch, where the children were watching with barely contained excitement. Then, to Katrina's surprise, he knelt on one knee. "Katrina Nolan, I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards. But I believe that when you find the right person, you just know. And I know." He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and a father to your children? Will you build a life with me?" Katrina looked at the ring, at William's hopeful face, at her children bouncing with excitement behind her. She thought about all the reasons to say no, to be cautious, to protect herself. And then she pushed them all aside and chose joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." William slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and kissed her, and the children cheered and danced around them. They set the wedding for October, giving William time to arrange his ranch affairs and for Katrina to prepare. William wanted her and the children to move to the ranch in the Animas Valley, but Katrina was reluctant to give up the homestead Thomas had built. "What if we split our time?" William suggested. "We can live at the ranch most of the year, where the land is better for cattle and the winters are less harsh. But we can come up here in the summer, keep this place maintained as a summer home. The children can remember their father, and you don't have to give up what he built." It was the perfect compromise, and Katrina loved him even more for understanding why the homestead mattered. The wedding was small but perfect. William's mother came from Denver, a warm woman in her 50s who embraced Katrina and the children without reservation. A few neighbors from Montezuma attended, as did Jack and the other ranch hands. The ceremony was held outside, with the mountains as a backdrop and the aspen leaves turning gold around them. Margaret and Emma were flower girls, scattering late-season wildflowers. Samuel stood with William as a groomsman, serious and proud in his new clothes. And Katrina walked down the makeshift aisle on her own because she was not being given away. She was choosing this, freely and fully. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, William kissed her thoroughly to the delight of everyone present. Then they turned to face their guests, and the children rushed forward to hug them both. "Can we call you Papa now?" Emma asked William. "I would be honored," he said, and Katrina saw tears in his eyes. The celebration afterward was joyful. William's mother had brought food from Denver, and there was music and dancing and laughter. Katrina danced with her new husband, with her children, with Jack, who was surprisingly graceful, and with William's mother, who promised they would be great friends. As the sun set and the party wound down, William pulled Katrina aside. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," she said. "Though I keep waiting to wake up and discover this was all a dream. It's real, we're real, and this is just the beginning." They spent their wedding night in the house, in the bed Katrina had shared with Thomas. She half expected it to feel wrong, but it did not. William was gentle and patient, and when she cried a little, he held her and told her it was all right to grieve even while celebrating. "You have room for all of it," he said. "The past and the present and the future. That's what makes you so strong." The next morning they began packing for the move to the ranch. The children were excited, full of questions about their new home. William described the big house he had built, with separate bedrooms for each child and a kitchen bigger than this entire house. "And animals?" Samuel asked eagerly. "So many animals, cattle and horses and chickens, even a barn cat who's excellent at catching mice." "Can we come back here?" Margaret asked. "To visit Papa's house?" "Of course," William said. "This will always be your house, a place you can come whenever you want." The journey to the ranch took 2 days, with the children riding in a wagon William had brought while he and Katrina rode horseback. They traveled through mountain passes and across high valleys, and everywhere William pointed out features of the land and told stories that kept the children entertained. When they finally came over the last ridge and saw the Animas Valley spread out below, Katrina caught her breath. It was beautiful, with the river winding through green bottomland and cattle dotting the hills. William's ranch sat in a protected spot with mountains at its back and the valley before it. The house was larger than Katrina had imagined, a proper two-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows. William's hands came out to greet them, friendly and welcoming. The house inside was sparsely furnished but comfortable, and true to his word, each child would have their own room. Emma was enchanted by the barn cat, a large orange tom named Rusty who tolerated her enthusiastic affection. Samuel wanted to see the cattle immediately. Margaret explored the house quietly, touching things with wonder. "What do you think?" William asked Katrina as they stood on the porch watching the children explore. "I think it's perfect. I think we're going to be very happy here." "I hope so. I want to give you everything, Katrina. Everything you and the children deserve. You already have. You gave us a future when we thought we didn't have one." That first year of marriage was an adjustment but a happy one. Katrina learned the rhythms of the ranch, working alongside William to manage the growing herd. The children thrived with room to run and plenty of food. Samuel became William's shadow, learning everything he could about ranching. Margaret discovered she had a talent for managing the chickens and the kitchen garden. Emma grew from a toddler to a little girl who charmed everyone she met. William's mother visited often, becoming a beloved grandmother figure. She taught Margaret to bake and told Emma stories, and praised Samuel's growing skills with animals. In the spring, they returned to the Montezuma homestead for a few weeks. Katrina visited Thomas's grave and told him about everything that had happened, about William and the children's happiness, and how she was building a new life while honoring the old one. "Thank you for the years we had," she said to the stone marker. "And thank you for giving me those beautiful children. I'll always love you, Thomas, but I'm happy now. I hope you can understand." The wind sighed through the aspens, and Katrina chose to believe it was his blessing. Back at the ranch, life continued to improve. William's operation grew more successful, and Katrina proved to have a natural talent for managing the business side. Together, they made an excellent team. In their second year of marriage, Katrina discovered she was pregnant. She was both thrilled and terrified, remembering how difficult her pregnancy with Emma had been. But William was wonderful, taking on extra work to spare her and insisting she rest when she needed to. In late winter, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas William, honoring both the past and the present. Samuel, Margaret, and Emma were enchanted with their new brother, and William was so proud he could barely speak. "Another son," he said, holding the baby with infinite gentleness. "I'm the luckiest man alive." "Just wait until he's keeping you up all night," Katrina said with a laugh. But even the sleepless nights were precious. This was her family, built from loss and held together by love. Every time she looked at William, she was grateful for that day he had ridden up the mountain and changed everything. 2 years later, they had a daughter, whom they named Rose after William's mother. The house was full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos of a large family. The ranch prospered, expanding into new land. The cattle operation became one of the most respected in the region. The children from Katrina's first marriage never forgot their father, but they loved William as a second papa without reservation. He adopted them legally, giving them his name, and treated them no differently than his biological children. Samuel grew into a young man who dreamed of having his own ranch someday. William began teaching him advanced ranching skills and promised to help him get started when the time came. Margaret surprised everyone by falling in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher and announcing she wanted to raise horses. William and Katrina supported her dream and helped her establish a small breeding program on their land. Emma, true to her charming nature, became a teacher in Durango, beloved by her students. Thomas William grew into a serious boy who loved books almost as much as he loved the cattle. Rose was wild and fearless, climbing trees and riding before she could properly walk. Through it all, William and Katrina's love deepened and grew. They had their disagreements, as any couple did, but they worked through them with honesty and respect. They supported each other's dreams and comforted each other's fears. They built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. On their 10th wedding anniversary, William surprised Katrina with a trip to Denver. They stayed in a fine hotel and attended the opera, things they never had time or money for in their daily lives. On their last night, they walked through the city streets, hand in hand. "You ever regret it?" Katrina asked. Buying that debt note and getting tangled up with a widow and 3 children. William stopped walking and turned to face her. "Not for a single second. That was the best decision I ever made. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me." Even when Samuel accidentally set the barn on fire, or when Emma painted the cat blue, even then, William said, laughing, "Life with you is never boring." "I love you," Katrina said, "more than I ever thought I could love someone again." "I love you too, always." They kissed there in the Denver street, 2 people who had found each other in unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful together. Years continued to pass. Samuel did start his own ranch, with William's help and guidance. Margaret's horse breeding program became successful, and she married a kind woman from town in a ceremony that celebrated love in all its forms. Emma taught for years before marrying a doctor and moving to Colorado Springs, though she visited often. Thomas William surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, though he always said his ranching background served him well. Rose married a cowboy who reminded everyone of William and started her own cattle operation with her usual fearless determination. William and Katrina grew older together, their hair graying and their hands weathering further with age, but their love never diminished. They still held hands on the porch in the evenings. They still made each other laugh. They still looked at each other like they had on their wedding day. They continued to visit the Montezuma homestead every summer, maintaining it carefully. It became a gathering place for the whole family, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. On a summer evening in their 35th year of marriage, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Katrina and William sat on the porch of that original homestead and watched the sun set over the mountains. "You remember the first time you came here?" Katrina asked. "Like it was yesterday. I saw 3 thin faces behind your skirts and I knew I had to help. You did more than help. You changed our lives." "We changed each other's lives," William corrected. "I was lonely and building an empire with no one to share it. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just accumulation. You gave me everything that matters." Samuel came out onto the porch, his own children trailing behind him. "Mama, Papa, dinner's ready. Grandma Rose made her famous pot roast. We'll be right there," William said. But they sat for another moment, watching the light fade and the stars begin to appear. Katrina thought about that terrified widow who had stood in this doorway so many years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right. That a stranger would ride up the mountain and become the love of her life. That her children would thrive and grow and have families of their own. That grief would transform into joy without erasing the past. "Ready?" William asked, standing and offering her his hand. "Always," Katrina said, taking it. They walked into the house together, toward the warmth and laughter and love that filled every corner. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal, silent witnesses to the story that had unfolded in their shadow. A story of loss and redemption, of courage and kindness, of a debt torn up, and a love that had grown from that single gesture of compassion. It was a story with a happy ending, the kind Katrina had once believed existed only in fairy tales. But it was real as the hand holding hers and the family waiting inside. She had learned that love could come twice in a lifetime, that hearts could heal without forgetting, and that sometimes the greatest gifts arrived unexpectedly on a dusty mountain trail. In the house, children called for their grandparents. Food steamed on the table. Stories waited to be told and retold. And Katrina and William stepped inside together, ready for whatever came next, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The debt note had been torn up 35 years ago, but the investment William had made that day had paid dividends beyond anything either of them could have imagined. Not in money or land or cattle, though they had all of that, but in love and family and a life well lived together. And in the end, that was everything.